Good evening. This is Erin O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm thrilled to welcome you to my telephone town hall tonight. We're also live on Facebook and on YouTube. Tonight, we're talking to people across Eastern Ontario about the path to recovery and how Canada's Conservatives will secure the future. You'll have the chance to ask me questions about Canada's recovery plan that we launched last week, our plan to get our country back on its feet and our economy back on track. If you have a question for me, please press *3 now, and you can ask it live on air. If you voted for Justin Trudeau in the past and you're disappointed and you want to explain to me why, hit *3. We can talk about that, and hopefully I can earn your trust. This past year and a half have been difficult for all families. Across the country, Canadians have lost loved ones. Some have lost jobs. Some are losing hope. There's a cost of living crisis right now in Canada. The cost of everything is going up. Instead of focusing on this cost of living crisis, instead of focusing on the fires in British Columbia or the fourth wave Delta variant, Mr. Trudeau has called an election. And last week, he said he doesn't even think about monetary policy and inflation because he doesn't think it impacts families. Well, with gas going up, groceries going up, kids back to school clothes going up, it does matter to families. Only a Prime Minister completely disconnected from the needs of families right now would say something like that. The Liberals, the NDP and the Green Party don't understand that running massive deficits and driving away jobs leads to inflation, skyrocketing prices, less opportunity for Canadians to get back to work, and eventually put our social programs at risk. The timing of this election is reckless. If you agree with me and are frustrated with that, hit *3 and tell me why you think this fourth wave Trudeau election is reckless. I think the government should be focused on getting workers and small businesses back on their feet, and that's exactly what Canada's recovery plan is offering. We're going to put you first, Canadians first, instead of Mr. Trudeau time after time putting his own agenda, or in some cases his own image, ahead of the needs of Canadians at home and on the world stage. The Liberals do not have a plan. We're hearing right now that Mr. Trudeau is scouring the internet for ideas, for big ideas, for wow ideas, because after 6 years, we have an unethical government with no plan for the future. The Team Trudeau is out of gas and has no plan. Canada's recovery plan is our plan to make sure that all sectors of the economy see a recovery and families in all regions of the country. And we need new leadership. In fact, what we've had lately is embarrassing. We have a government that doesn't seem ready for the challenges ahead of Canada. And if I learned anything from my 12 years in the military, it's that you always have to have a plan. So we have a plan. We're getting ready to implement it if we can secure your trust so that we can secure the future in the next election. And for us, every part of Ontario's economy is important. Our healthcare system and the impacts of the pandemic are important. If you have any questions on issues impacting your families, hit *3 and you can ask me directly. We're ready to deliver Canada's recovery plan, our plan to boost the economy and get Canada back on track, recovering 1 million jobs in 1 year, securing accountability by enacting new anti-corruption laws to clean up the mess in Ottawa, securing mental health by delivering our Canada Mental Health Action Plan, securing capacity here at home so that we'll be ready for future pandemics. And fifth, our fifth pillar, securing our economy by balancing the budget over the next decade. Details on all of our plan can be found in Canada's recovery plan. And really, this election comes down to this. Who do you trust to secure your economic future? There may be 5 parties, but there are really only 2 choices. Canada's Conservatives and our plan, or more of the same. I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight and being accountable to you. As I said, please press *3 now if you have a question. And we're so happy to have one of our candidates host as moderator tonight, Jennifer Jennekens from Ottawa West, Nepean. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Erin. I'm Jennifer Jennekens, your Conservative candidate for Ottawa West, Nepean. I support Erin O'Toole's vision for Canada, and I'm proud to be here with him tonight. Erin was raised in Bowmanville, Ontario, a community with middle-class values of hard work and helping your neighbor. He served our country in the Royal Canadian Air Force for 12 years and has proudly represented the riding of Durham in the House of Commons since 2012. Erin stands up for hard-working Canadians. He wants to work for you and make sure that for generations to come, Canadians can grow with world-class services, a healthy economy, and healthy finances. The telephone town hall is about to start, so please press *3 to ask Erin a question. Again, if you have a question for Erin O'Toole, press *3 now.
And if you have a question on Facebook or YouTube, use the comments. And we're going to try and take as many questions as possible tonight. So what do you have teed up first, Jennifer?
Okay. So we have Charlie from Bath, and he wants to ask a question about U.S. relations.
Hi, Charlie. Are you there, Charlie?
President. Yes, I'm there. Hello?
Hi there. You're live with Erin O'Toole. Go ahead.
Okay, ever since Mr. Biden came in as president, Canada has had no improvement in its relations over the relationship it had with Mr. Trump. What would you do to improve the relationship? Mr. Trudeau has been snubbed by Mr. Biden ever since the G7 conference this summer. What would you do to improve that situation?
That's a great question, Charlie. In fact, our economic future and securing that future really depends on us improving relations with the United States and advancing our interests, sometimes directly with the U.S. president and our interests in common. As you're right, Mr. Trudeau has had a terrible start with President Biden. In fact, Keystone XL was canceled on the first day of the presidency. As a symbolic gesture, that's a pretty bad start for Canada-U.S. relations. It's the second time that pipeline was canceled under Mr. Trudeau under two different presidents. We also see Line 5 at risk. We see the U.S. under President Biden increasing softwood lumber tariffs and agricultural tariffs. So what would I do, Charlie? I would make sure our interests are aligned with the U.S. with respect to China especially. Mr. Trudeau was completely offside with the United States on Huawei in the 5G infrastructure. But Mr. Trudeau was actually approving takeovers by Chinese state companies that had been denied by the Conservative government because of security concerns with Canada and the U.S. The U.S. noticed how out of step Mr. Trudeau was with our allies, and we've seen a deteriorating relationship. Charlie, when I go to Washington, I advance our interests. I meet with members of Congress to talk trade. I also talk security. I served in our military and did training and did exercises with the U.S. I also worked on international trade between Canada and the U.S. in the private sector. It's time for a prime minister that will go down to Washington to fight for our interests, not to fight for attention, which is what Mr. Trudeau does when he's on the world stage. So, Charlie, we need to improve that relationship. And you're in Bath, you're in a border area. We need to have a secure and effective plan for long-term reopening of the border, both for trade, but also for safe and secure travel and certainty for a lot of border communities. This will be a priority.
All right, we have Colin who's asking about food prices.
Oh, thank you very much for taking the question. So whether you're going to kindergarten or you have an already established career, a productive day and good health start with good nutrition. What will the Conservative Party of Canada do to address the rapid inflation of food prices so Canadians can afford to put nutritious foods on their tables?
Thank you, Colin. As I said off the start, we are seeing a cost of living crisis in Canada right now. Over the last couple of years, we've seen that in housing, but we actually now see this in groceries. We see this in fuel prices for families that are commuting. We see this in all aspects. And I also talk to small business owners who are seeing their margin disappear as their suppliers are increasing costs. In fact, for the first time in decades, there's worry and fear about prolonged and rising inflation at a time that wages simply aren't going up to keep pace. So, Colin, we're doing a few things to tackle this and to give families a break. We with our doubling of the working Canadian benefit, we're going to give essentially lower income levels a $1 per hour raise. We want to make sure that there is more at a time when prices are going up. We also are going to accelerate hiring coming out of COVID-19 through our job surge plan, where for some people that have been chronically unemployed, 10 months or longer without employment, we will provide up to 50% of the salary to an employer that hires someone who's been chronically unemployed, because we want to get all Canadians back to work. We want working Canadians to have a boost. And then we've said we're going to have a GST holiday in December. It's been a very tough year. We need to give families a break and help retailers who have been suffering. So our GST holiday in December will be restricted to bricks and mortar stores. It's not for online purchases. It's not for more American web giant. It's about small independents or SME, small, medium-sized businesses that have been holding on through this pandemic, especially in Ontario with restrictions. We want to see an acceleration of in-store purchases. So the GST holiday is yet another way that we want to fight the rising cost of living. And as I said, the more flexibility we give them, Colin, they can make those purchases for their families. They can get healthy foods, and it's something that's important for families.
All right, next we have Lucy and Everest, a couple, asking about old age pension.
Go ahead. You're live with us.
Yes, hello. My name's Tom Everest. My wife's Lucy, and we're pensioners, and we haven't seen any kind of a raise in our old age security pension for years. And with the price of groceries going up and lumber, we can't even afford to make renovations in our house, and we can barely afford to buy food. I'm just wondering if your government has a plan to help us with a little bit more money for that.
Well, thank you, Tom and Lucy. It's good that you're both listening in. The cost of living crisis I've spoken about already and at the top. Who does that hit the most? People on fixed incomes. And you see everything going up, food, fuel, the property taxes, a range of other things, but you don't see your benefits going up. So we have supported the bumps to program old age security within the pandemic. We also, as I said, for some seniors that may be transitioning into retirement and having one foot in the workforce, we are going to have that $1 per hour raise for working Canadians at the lower tax bracket. But we also are going to have a variety of programs to help people stay in their home longer. So more accessibility tax credit for seniors looking to make sure that they stay in their own home. We also are going to have major investments in long-term care and partnering with the provinces on care for seniors and improving. And we want to give a break. As I talked about earlier, our GST holiday for December, we want to get the economy moving and spending under control, because one of the big drivers of Mr. Trudeau's inflation is the runaway spending. No plan to contain it and fewer people working. In fact, Mr. Trudeau continually just extending emergency benefits from COVID without a long-term plan to get people back to work. So we're trying to secure the future by getting people back to work and then restoring and building up health, $60 billion in new money over the next decade for healthcare in a way that's predictable, and then targeted supports for seniors trying to stay in their own home and keeping up with a rising cost of living. It's all in Canada's recovery plan, Tom. So you and Lucy listening in, go to our website and you can download this PDF. And if you have any questions directly, send a note. We want to earn your trust.
All right, we have Ryan next, asking about vaccine passports.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, Erin? Just wanted to ask your opinion on mandatory vaccines in the workplace and vaccine passports. As someone I'm an essential worker who's choosing not to be vaccinated right now until I get some more data, and my job's at risk, and I just want to know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, thanks, Ryan. I'm glad you called in. I'm glad you explained to me your situation. The first thing I'll say to you, find out a little bit more about the vaccines, and you want to see more data. They are safe and effective for use, and I've been saying that for well over a year because we've been pushing to have faster access. I even publicized when my wife and I got the vaccines. We had COVID. It was kind of an unsettling time, so we showed people that it's safe and effective. I worked on healthcare issues in the private sector, and for some lower end drug products and things like this, I used to review some of the clinical work and the approvals. We have a very, very high level regulatory review process for drugs, medical devices, all of these things. And so there are some people that have questions, some level of hesitancy. I think you should get vaccinated, but it is a health decision that you make, and we respect that. That's why our approach when it comes to Mr. Trudeau's last-minute demand before an election for federal workers a mandatory vaccine, we've said provisions that are reasonable could be put in with daily testing, rapid testing, to make sure that some people that may not be vaccinated can be safe and cannot spread to others. So let's use all the tools, but I can't stress it enough. I'm glad you're getting more data because people need to make that informed decision themselves. When it comes to passports, Ryan, or decisions about limiting access to a certain event or something like that, provinces are setting up a variety of different approaches to this. Quebec and Manitoba, for example, are moving to passports. We heard MLSE, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, are going to require either a vaccine or a proof of a daily test to show a negative for COVID-19 before going to watch one of the MLSE teams, like the Blue Jays, for example. We respect those. That's the provinces and workplaces making decisions to make people safe. And I think Canadians need to balance off their right to make their own personal health decisions alongside responsibilities we all have to make sure that we keep the fourth wave of the pandemic as minimal and as small as possible so we don't see more restrictions and lockdowns.
Okay, we have Clint next on the lines asking about clean water for First Nation communities.
Hi, Clint.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Hope you're doing well.
I am. My question, so far, after almost 6 years, Mr. Trudeau's track record on getting water, clean drinking water to Indigenous communities is not very good. So I'm curious, if elected, what are you prepared to do immediately to get this completed? This has been ongoing for years, and I myself is a long-time Conservative voter. My wife is an Indigenous woman who is on the fence, and this is a topic that's very close to her. Wondering what Conservatives are prepared to do.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak about this, Clint. It is very important, and I hope your wife's listening as well. Access to safe drinking water, I view as a human right. And what we have to do is get a plan to get there. And I think at the core of reconciliation is trust. And after generations in Canada, both Liberal and Conservative, to be honest, that trust has been eroded. And I say this often, I know Mr. Trudeau cares. I think all parties care about the road to reconciliation, but it's a matter, it comes down to what are you going to do as leader? I think it's irresponsible to make a promise, as Mr. Trudeau did, to end boil water advisories, to provide safe drinking water on all Indigenous reserves when he had no plan to actually meet the promise. And then a few years later, he doesn't apologize for it. He has his minister, Minister Miller, go out and accept responsibility for something Justin Trudeau promised with no plan. I will never conduct myself like that. That erodes trust. That is a step backwards in reconciliation. So what I've said we would do is establish that principle that it's a right, and we will work in partnership with First Nation communities and with Indigenous leaders on achieving that objective and prioritizing it with funding. What I also want to do to make sure that we don't just make promises without accountability, I want governance of these commitments to have Indigenous leaders in that oversight function, to hold not only politicians to account, but the department itself, which has not gotten it done many times over the last several generations. So Clint, I want you and your wife to know this is a very important area for me. I did some pro bono work before I became a politician on some small business and entrepreneurial issues with Indigenous business leaders and groups. This is a thing, something I think all Canadians have a role in reconciliation, but the government of Canada cannot make promises and not meet them. That is something we won't do, and that was the way I conducted myself as Veterans Minister. It's how I will conduct myself as Prime Minister.
Okay, we have Donna next, who's asking about the Winnipeg lab leak.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, Erin. Oh, hi, Erin. Thanks for taking my question. Am I on?
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just asking about what you're going to do with respect to what happened with the Winnipeg lab leak. Justin's escaped the WE scandal, and I feel like he's called this election because he's avoiding what's happened in Winnipeg. So I was just wondering how you were going to proceed on that, and so we can find out what happened.
Great, thanks, Donna. It sounds like your dog wants answers too. I agree. It seems like Mr. Trudeau, whenever he gets sort of caught in an issue or not being transparent with people, he'll either shut down Parliament, prorogue Parliament, or in the case of the Winnipeg lab situation and the scientists with ties to the Chinese military, he's not only defied a vote of Parliament, he's going to court to actually continue his cover-up. It is literally unprecedented. I know in Canada, it might be unprecedented in the sort of parliamentary democracy history that we're a part of, because when Parliament passes something, particularly just about releasing documents, that should be acted upon. In the culture of cover-up, of shutting down debate, of filibustering, I think Canadians are tired of that approach of Mr. Trudeau. So what I've said I would do, Donna, is in the first 100 days, I would release documents on the Winnipeg lab situation. And what many fear was a security breach, or Mr. Trudeau even used one day in question period a statement of espionage. I think Canadians deserve to know, and we need to work with our allies to make sure all investigations about origins of COVID and things like this are explored in a responsible way, because we see a lot of misinformation out there too, and a way that makes sure that any sensitive intelligence can be protected. Parliament has done this many times in the past and will do it again. So I've gone to court to intervene so that Mr. Trudeau doesn't use the courts to continue his cycle of cover-up. And I've made a commitment that within the first 100 days as Prime Minister, I would make sure that there was transparency with respect to this. The second pillar of our overall plan, Donna, Canada's recovery plan, is a series of transparency and accountability measures that I think are needed. Mr. Trudeau has been investigated 3 times by the Ethics Commissioner. There is this cycle, as I said, of not being transparent with Canadians. We're going to build in transparency in lobbying. We're going to build in accountability if you're found to have breached ethical laws. People have that expectation in their workplace. If you break a rule or a law, there will be some consequences to it. There should be in politics as well.
Okay, we have Michelle next, who is asking about funding to hospitals.
Hi, Erin. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
I've worked in healthcare for 30 years and have seen a rapid decline in patient care due to funding. Now, they increase funding and it goes to the hospital, but no one tells them where that funding's supposed to go. So, as I've seen, like we started out with a CEO, a VP, and your manager. Now we have 10 to 15 layers of middle management, but we're losing those frontline workers. And then your own premier, Conservative premier, introduced a bill in Ontario limiting those workers to a 1% raise, which isn't even the cost of living, which also, it's the only public sector limited. You're not limiting police, you're not limiting fire. We were called heroes during the pandemic, but yet in that pandemic, you pass a bill to limit our wage increase. So a lot of people are looking at getting out of the profession. So how do you plan to improve healthcare when there's bills that Doug Ford have introduced limiting the workers?
Well, thanks for the question, Michelle. And you and your colleagues are heroes. As I've said, in my own area, the Durham region and Lake Ridge Health, it was wonderful to see, and I participated in one of them, the parades of cars that were going by our hospitals, our long-term care homes, because we really did need our front lines there and are still seeing our front lines there. And I can only imagine, especially in the early parts of the pandemic, when there was so much uncertainty, how stressful it was, the toll on our frontline people. And I know I talk to many and I've heard the stories of burnout, and we want to try and work with you. Part of our mental health pillar, we know we'll work with some of the frontline groups that right now are experiencing fatigue, burnout, higher rates of depression, and other things from the pandemic. On healthcare in general, Michelle, as you know, the provinces deliver healthcare and will make decisions about LHINs and the administration, which in Ontario over the last number of decades, there has been a discussion about how can more get to the front, to the pointy end of the stick, as we might say, we used to call it in the military, and less in the bureaucracy of healthcare. I'll always respect what the provinces want to do to maximize and make sure their systems work as well as possible. What they need is a reliable federal partner that will provide stable, increasing, and predictable funding. So in our recovery plan, Michelle, we have committed $60 billion over 10 years based on a 6% minimum increase per year that we will give to the provinces. It represents the largest commitment in a generation that will allow all issues to be addressed by the provinces in terms of frontline needs and burnout. It will also address some of the critical capacity gaps that are going to be looked at long-term care. On top of that, we have as our third pillar mental health and wellness, and we're going to have a range of everything. I announced some treatment beds for addiction yesterday and some community support centers given the opioid crisis. We're also going to have direct community funding for mental health related issues and a dedicated $1 billion for Indigenous mental health and addiction programming over 5 years. But that upfront 6% increasing predictable funding is our way to try and be a reliable, serious federal partner. And as I said, I want to end as I started. Thank you, Michelle. We want and need you and your colleagues to stay on those front lines, and we want you to know from a federal basis, we will have your back.
Okay, we have Steve next, who's asking about your job plans.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. So I am a medium-sized employer, and you've talked about the Million Jobs Plan, and right now we've probably got about 100 plus open positions and cannot fill them. I'd like to know just what your plan is to find the people once you create these million jobs, or do you plan on opening up immigration? What is the strategy behind that?
Can I ask you a question, Steve? What industry are you in? You don't have to give me your business name or anything, but what sector?
Production.
Production.
Manufacturing.
Yeah. Okay, Steve, I want you to know, I hear you. This is something, the shortage of workers and a gap in the workforce is something we hear consistently across the entire country. It doesn't matter the region. And increasingly, while it's most acute in hospitality and services, I increasingly hear business leaders like yourself talking about manufacturing, fabrication, not being able to find enough workers. Part of that has been the lack of a plan post first wave of the crisis. What Mr. Trudeau has done is just continued to extend the emergency programs that were put in place originally with the first wave, but he didn't tailor them to the needs of the economy. So as it became clear that we'd be able to work and work safely in some sectors, we needed to really target a program like the CERB to areas where people could not work. There was no work. We should have transitioned more to an EI model again, as opposed to everyone on CERB. So our plan, Steve, and our job surge is about changing from CERB payments for people not to work into a regime where we're incentivizing work as we wrap down the emergency programs. We are going to give a boost to actually incentivize employers like yourself to hire people who've been chronically unemployed. So you'll get a 50% form of boost of a wage subsidy for 6 months if you hire someone that has been off. We're doing that because we know from talking to people and talking to people that work with people in career transition, the longer you're off work, the less chance some employers will take on hiring you. We're going to incentivize that because we have to get everyone working again. We cannot forever extend the CERB or what Mr. Trudeau and some of the parties have suggested they might do through their party conventions, turn the CERB into a universal basic income. Not only would that kind of change the social contract here in Canada, that would hollow out our ability to pay for health care, pay for old age security. So Steve, in our recovery plan, we want you to be able to accelerate your hiring through incentive. But as I said, we will be trying to wind down the programs in a way that is fair, but pivoting clearly to driving employment numbers up. And we will also have some dedicated supports in terms of business loans, of highly affected sector strategies, because we really want to pivot from a putting the economy on hold type approach at the beginning of the pandemic to fueling a recovery in all sectors in all regions.
Okay, we have Patricia next asking about China.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Erin. I'm concerned about the deterioration of the relationship between Canada and China under the Trudeau government. It seems that China is working steadily towards becoming the superpower as opposed to the United States in the world, and it seems that China has repeatedly treated Canada with a lack of disrespect. I'm thinking in particular of the two Michaels and also of the various trade situations. I just wondered, as Prime Minister, what would you do to improve or establish a better relationship with China?
That's a great question, Patricia, and thank you. And we do see in recent years some of the worst aspects of the communist political system showing themselves in China. The suppression of freedom and liberty, the limitation of reporting, the genocide taking place against the Uyghur minority population, the police state in Hong Kong, manipulating global trade, particularly in critical commodities like steel and aluminum. We see all that increasing at a time that Mr. Trudeau has been actually trying to promote enhanced trade and just been kind of out of step entirely with the reality of China. And as you said, the extremely sad and frustrating case of the two Michaels, in 13 days, they'll have been in a Chinese prison for 1,000 days. That's unacceptable, as is some of the other actions of the communist regime in China. So I will take a much different position. I will stand up for our interests, including our citizens, our security, but also our values in terms of human rights. And it was the Conservative opposition months ago that brought a motion in the House of Commons to recognize a genocide against the Uyghur minority population. Mr. Trudeau didn't even show up for the vote. And I thought that was a very poor demonstration of our multi-generational, multi-party historically commitment to standing on principle for human rights and for dignity. And here is what I think will happen, Patricia. The more we work with our allies, especially the United States, who have seen Mr. Trudeau as being offside on security, on Huawei, Australia, which has taken a much more principled stand than Mr. Trudeau, New Zealand, the UK, some of our closer allies, we need to provide pressure collectively on the communist leadership in China, including the use of Magnitsky sanctions. And I often will say Canada may be smaller in terms of our population and our economic clout, but we're a giant when it comes to our commitments to the rule of law, to human rights, to standing up for the vulnerable. And I think the more we can mobilize our closest allies to start pushing back against such conduct, I think that the leadership in China will actually respond better to that than to the perceived weaker approach of Mr. Trudeau that has been, quite frankly, all over the map. He did fundraising and said that Communist China was a country he admired because they get things done. And then he abandoned his free trade interest. He was going to have an extradition deal with China. He's been all over the map, and that doesn't send the consistency that I think our allies need to see. So it's time for a serious leader on the world stage again, and that's what I will offer as Prime Minister.
Okay, we have Shelly next, who has a question about post-secondary education.
Hi, Shelly.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for taking my call. My question is just around the high cost of post-secondary education. I appreciated what you said about the government needing to stick up for vulnerable people. And I'm thinking about students who are really bright and work very hard, but come from a lower income family and are completely unable to go to university without incurring a huge amount of debt that, you know, with the high cost of living is close to impossible for them to pay off. I'm wondering if the government has any plans to help with programs around that, or what your thoughts are around that issue.
Well, thanks, Shelly. As someone that, I grew up in Bowmanville, not too far from many of the places we're talking to in Eastern Ontario, and literally my dad was a broken record talking about the importance of education literally at our kitchen table every day. And so I think we have to make sure young people have the opportunity to go to university or college, apprenticeship, pursue that education. And we brought forward a number of programs when we were in government in the past in terms of access to student loans for apprentices and other things like that. We want to be able to make sure that students have the ability to work, save for their education, and any way we can do to try and accelerate that process, we're going to be there to try and be in terms of working at lowering student debt. In the midst of the pandemic, when the Trudeau government decided to just put everyone on the CERB, including students, I actually went into the House of Commons, outside of the virtual sessions, to make a proposal to do something different. Rather than use the CERB and just encourage all students not to work, accelerate the student summer job program, multiply it by 4 or 5, put that investment out to small businesses, to community events, fairs, all of these things that the summer jobs program would normally cover. There would have been enough to also pay for a $2,000 tuition credit for every student that would have participated for half the cost of the $9 or $10 billion, roughly, I can't recall exactly, of extending the CERB. This government doesn't think in an innovative way, and I think a lot of students would have loved the ability to safely work, help those small businesses on their feet in between the first and second waves, and get that tuition benefit for college or university. So I think anything we can do to show we're going to partner with young people as they pursue an opportunity, we're going to do. Our other thing I would add, Shelly, is we have a very comprehensive set of policies on tackling the housing crisis and the fact that a lot of young people not only are taking on student debt, they're giving up on home ownership. So we have a number of policies that we hope will bring home ownership closer to the next generation, because we want that to be an aspirational element for each generation. Work hard, pursue a good career, have a home, and build wealth so that you can have success. That needs to be something we don't abandon for this generation.
Okay, we have Mike next, who his question is on how do we get this country back on track. Mike, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. Can you hear me?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you very much for taking my call. First of all, I'm a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I'm still a government employee. I work with military intelligence. My question is more about not just the financial recovery of our country, but as well the patriotic recovery of our country. And what I mean by that is never before in my life have I ever seen our country more divided between demonizing legal firearm owners, demonizing folks who ask for alternative methods to the vaccine, turning their back on the West, the gas and the oil, trying to hide what they're doing with C-10. The country has never been more divided. So my question to you, good sir, is how do you see our country getting back on track patriotically and tearing down these horrible division walls that the Liberal government have been putting up?
Well, thanks, Mike. First off, thank you for your service. You know, I love encountering veterans when I'm out on the road or on these telephone town halls, because I really appreciate what you do. I spoke to a friend of mine, Peter, today, who helps do training for some of our injured veterans, and we can't do enough to support people that have served their country and put their life on the line. I agree with you. I think perhaps the most concerning thing after 6 years with Mr. Trudeau as Prime Minister is just the degree of division in this country. I'd like to say when I was a cabinet minister at the end of the last Conservative government, the Bloc Québécois, the separation party from Quebec, was not an official party in Ottawa at the time. If you'd said the word Wexit out west, they would have looked at the exit sign on the door. No one would have known that term. Now we have 3 provinces that have sort of active groundswell movements of people that are so frustrated they're starting to give up on a country they love, including veterans that I've met that are so frustrated they're looking at some of these options. I often say Canada's best days are ahead of us, but we have to address these divisions. We have to get the country back on its feet and back on track. Part of that is respecting the differences in our federation, not having Ottawa dictate what job you can have and what part of the economy should recover. We've seen Mr. Trudeau literally declare war on the energy and the resource sector, a sector that's provided so much to our country. We want to see that sector and the families that need good jobs and their prosperity is tied to it. We want to see it recover. We want to see a softwood lumber agreement. We want to see the economy back on its feet. And I don't like the approach of pitting rural Canadians versus urban on the hunters or sport shooters or people that don't know about our system of screening, training, and licensing with the PAL, for example. Let's talk about how we can address some of the inequalities in our society, including reconciliation, not by tearing down Canada or our institutions, but by learning, addressing inequalities and building up the country, adding to the story of Canada. I try and do that by myself talking about figures in the past like Tommy Prince, our decorated Devil's Brigade veteran, one of our top Indigenous veterans in terms of decorations. I spoke about him in Washington when I was minister in 2015, holding up stories that probably weren't told in our past because of discrimination or unfairness or racism. So let's make sure we build the country that we know Canada can be. And we're not going to do that if we're not willing to commit and really love Canada to make it better. So whether you call that sort of a patriotic renewal or recovery, whatever you call it, Mike, I'm proud of this country. It's why I'm running to lead it. I do think its best days are ahead of us, but it's going to take a leader, it's going to take a plan, and it's going to take a renewed true patriot love, and that's what I'm offering.
Okay, we have Grant next, who has a question on the housing crisis. Go ahead, Grant.
Hi, Grant.
Hi, Erin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Thanks for taking my question. In regards to the importance of education, like you mentioned earlier, I moved myself and my son from the Maritimes here to Ontario so he could get a better education. However, with the housing crisis today, it would be virtually impossible for me to own a home here. Do you have a plan for any relief in this area?
That's a great question, Grant. You know, a few years ago, the housing crisis may have been restricted to Vancouver and the Vancouver suburbs and Toronto and the Toronto suburbs. Now, literally everywhere in Southern Ontario is driving the cost out of touch. Just the other day, I saw a home in a rural part of Ontario sell with multiple bids for something like $300,000 over asking. It's how can an average family compete with that? So we do have a series of positions we put in our platform, Grant, Canada's Recovery Plan, to try and address this. Part of it is supply, so we need more housing, more units. So we have an ambitious plan to have 1 million more units in 3 years. That's going to mean accelerating building, and we're going to try and use the federal spending power to incentivize that. I announced this last week in Ottawa. Density around transit. So we want transit investments to go, but we want that to accelerate the construction of housing. We want to fix the CMHC and the mortgage process. We also want to extend mortgage terms so that, say, a first-time home buyer can lock in an interest rate for 7 to 10 years as opposed to 5. That locks in a little more certainty for planning, particularly as rates are low, but inflation with Mr. Trudeau in recent months means that people are worried, especially with variable mortgages, that in a few years they won't be able to afford. So locking that in. We also want to stop foreign purchasing to be one factor driving up housing costs, especially in some of the large urban centers, but this trickles over. So if you're not going to live here and you're just parking money here as a safe investment, as we've seen people do, that is not fair to families that are desperate to get into the housing market. So we said we're going to ban that practice and review that in 2 years. It is a drastic step, but we have to take drastic action to combat, quite frankly, millions of people being priced out of home ownership in the country. So there's a lot in our plan, Grant, on this. I hear you, and we want to make sure we're giving people that route to home ownership.
Okay, we have Chris next, who has a question on spending.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hi, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, listen, all this planning and so forth sounds good, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to end up picking up the paycheck and paying the bill. And my question is, where is all of this money coming from? We're already millions in debt right now.
You're absolutely right. Billions in debt, in fact, Chris. In fact, the way Mr. Trudeau's spending is going, we're closing in on $1.4 trillion in debt. He crossed the trillion threshold, which is hard to even fathom. So our plan has the fifth pillar of getting back to balance over the next decade. We put a 10-year frame, Chris, for 2 reasons. One, we want to get people on their feet and working again after COVID, and we're going to have to invest to get some businesses back on their feet. And so we don't see a wave of insolvencies and bankruptcies after the pandemic, which there's a lot holding on by a thread. 2/3 of Canadians work for a small or medium-sized business. So if we see a flurry of insolvencies, we're then going to see higher chronic unemployment. So that's the big reason we're taking 10 years. We also will have some social costs of the pandemic. And so I've been talking about addiction and mental health, and we feel those are important investments to make. But our focus, Chris, is getting people back to work. And as the programs end in October, Mr. Trudeau just kept kicking them down the road. He's running a fourth wave pandemic election because he really has no plan for when those programs end. We're going to kickstart a private sector-led recovery. As I said, we want to see recovery in all sectors of the economy. We're not picking or choosing like the other parties who don't like whole swaths of natural resources or fabrication or those sorts of traditional industries. We're going to fuel a private sector-led recovery, fuel innovation that we know will pay dividends in the medium term. So we're using, I think, a very prudent 10-year time frame to get the economy moving, to get spending under control, but by supporting people with major investments in health and wellness. We're right now costing our platform, Chris, with the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It's right on the back page here. I keep referring to this because I think Canadians deserve a plan. They deserve to know who and how is going to pay the bill. Mr. Trudeau is just pushing the bill off to our kids and grandkids. I won't do that. I think it's wrong. So please check out our recovery plan. I think it's a balanced way to get the country back on its feet.
Okay, we have Jane next, who has a question on rural broadband accessibility.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Erin. I'm very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
I voted for you when you were first a member of Parliament, and you're not our member now because there were a few changes with the alignment of voting areas. But nevertheless, I still wish you the best.
Oh, that's
anyway,
lovely. Thank you.
Well, you're worth every minute of it, and I'll tell you why. but first of all, I thank you for taking the question, and I hope I'm asking this question with the proper focus. It may be a municipal matter or a provincial issue. However, my questions when I ask people who are going for election in those areas, I don't seem to get a satisfactory answer to my liking anyway. And what I wanted to ask, it's about broadband internet. Is getting a high-speed, high-brand internet out in regards to a better output, in regards to rural areas, we're in the green belt, in the interest of for better reception. We have satellite, but it has proved to be not always the best. We have some trees around our house, and one tree had to be partially cut the side out of it to get reception. And also, it's very costly compared to another person that's near us that they can get broadband reception, but they get it from a different system. And so I'm just not sure if this is a federal item or if I should be still after the municipal or the provincial government. I know that being in the Greenbelt might be a problem, but I don't know if it is. I know that Brooklyn and Whitby, where there's new construction, I read in the Clarington Times that they now have access to it. But I don't think there'll be one coming. I know there's a new something at Kendall, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. No, I hear you, Jane, and I know exactly where you are. You're in Northumberland, Peterborough South. You're in my friend Phil Lawrence's riding now. I was really proud to represent that part of Clarington, including Kendall and Newcastle and Orono. I'm kind of always backing up Phil now because that's right next door. And I know this call goes as far as your area and right here to Ottawa. So we have a lot of people on tonight. We think broadband is critical, Jane. I hear you. In fact, one of the first things I started working on as a new member of Parliament was broadband because our riding is, my riding at the time, including where you are, is considered the GTA. And we had some people that couldn't get reliable high-speed internet, and it was considered the GTA. So think about real rural or northern parts of the country. So obviously the private sector is the provider here. The governments, some municipalities run internet service, but most don't. We think this is critical. There is a digital divide that has shown up in this pandemic where families for educating their children right through to running a small business If you don't have that high-speed, reliable access, you're seeing a second-class set of services in the digital economy. So we think the federal government has a major role to play. Right now, Mr. Trudeau has 6 different departments or agencies working on one problem. We're going to accelerate and have a goal to connect Canadians by 2025. Some provinces are giving up waiting for Mr. Trudeau's plan, so they're creating their own plans. We will partner with the provinces, municipalities, and the private sector. That includes incentivizing the private sector to build out in some areas that might not make business sense, but that's where the public good comes in, and we will invest. We think it will be not only productive, but it will also make sure we have the capacity to react if there's another crisis. So Mr. Trudeau has set a timeline of 2030 and has this haphazard, as I said, 6 different departments looking at tackling this. We're going to create a Minister of Rural Affairs. We're going to empower them to deliver by 2025. And this is the big difference between Mr. Trudeau and myself. He announces things and they disappear and never get done. I will deliver. And that was my way when I was minister, and even people that were skeptical at first on whether I could deliver, I always made commitments I knew we could deliver on. And we must deliver on this because it's critical for our recovery. And it's in our recovery plan, Jane. So thank you for the lovely words off the top, and give my best to everyone there in Northumberland, Peterborough South. Phil Lawrence is doing a great job, and I hope he earns your trust again.
Thank you, Erin. I know the Conservative team is ready to deliver Canada's recovery plan and stand up for hardworking Canadians and their families. That's why I'm glad you're leading Canada's Conservatives in this election. We hope you found tonight's conversation useful. If Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives can count on your vote, please press 1. If you're supporting another party, please press 2. If you're still unsure of how you'll vote, please press 3. If you didn't have a chance to ask your question, please stay on the line and leave a message for our staff. Your question is important, and we'd like to have the chance to respond to you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You did a great job, our candidate in Ottawa West, Nepean, and I'm really proud of our incredible team that we have across Eastern Ontario. I know we've got Jennifer McAndrew in Kanata Carleton, Susan MacArthur in Glengarry, Prescott Russell, Ryan Williams in Bay Quinte, Hastings, Lennox, Addington, Shelby Cramp Newman, Peterborough Kawartha, Michelle Ferrari, and Phil Lawrence. As I said, Jane knows in Northumberland, Peterborough South. We've got an incredible team of men and women stepping up across the country to deliver a recovery. Canada's recovery plan is our plan to get the country back on its feet and back on track. And these telephone town halls are great. We've talked on a range of issues, from Steve, a medium-sized business owner, having trouble finding people, jobs available, but right now there's a disincentive in some places because Mr. Trudeau hasn't adapted the programs. We've talked to people about the rising prices. Colin talking about food prices. We've talked about Indigenous reconciliation with Clint and his wife on commitments on drinking water, healthcare, China, Mike the veteran. This has been great. This is our way of being accountable to you. Canada's Conservatives have a plan. We've got a great team, and we've got an ethical track record. I'm in politics for you. I served in the military for 12 years, worked in the private sector, and now we're putting forward a plan to get the country back on its feet and, to Mike's point, restore some pride. I think Canada's best days are ahead of us. We've got challenges as a country, no question about it. We've got inequalities. We've got to commit to reconciliation and calls to action. But to tackle these things, including climate change and the challenges of our time, we need a strong economy so that we can tackle these things and give ourselves the flexibility to really lead the world. I think we can as Canadians. We've done it before, we'll do it again, but it takes leadership. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating tonight. Follow us on our social media feeds. Check out Canada's Recovery Plan. And on September 20th, please vote to secure the future. Thank you very much.